Come on, Zig. No snacks. Keep it moving.
I'm really happy to be back and getting into the swing of things again with the horses. I am just about caught up on the extra chores that I needed to do from being away. This evening, I'm going to spend some extra time with Ziggy after I finish a few chores. I did speak with my vet while I was out of town, and Ziggy's metabolic panel came back completely normal, so he doesn't have Cushing's or PPID. He isn't insulin resistant. That is great news for when I finally find him a perfect home. Finding a good home for an older horse like Ziggy is pretty hard, and it gets even harder when you add on a twice a day daily medication. With Ziggy back on his regular turnout routine, it seems like Prim is settling down quite a bit. Although her and Ziggy aren't best buds yet, he does seem to have a kind of calming vibe towards Prim. Frisco still doesn't like Prim to be too far away, but at least now he doesn't get upset when she goes over and hangs out with Ziggy.
Hey, girl.
I am going to be working Ziggy in the round pen today, so I've got to get Scarlet moved over to the little arena, and I am going to clean up all of these turds in here. You wouldn't think that a few days out of a normal routine wouldn't mess up a horse's training too much, but for a very reactive horse like Scarlet, she is still a little bit suspicious of me haltering her again. We were definitely past this point before I left, but the few days away gave her enough time to realize that maybe she doesn't like getting haltered anymore. I have been at the stage where I've been trying really hard to halter her like a normal horse, but her muzzle is still very sensitive. While I was trying to get the halter on her, it did touch her just a tiny bit, and it did give her a little bit of a scare. I have worked pretty hard throughout Scarlet's training to let her know that even when she does get scared, it is totally fine to come back and investigate and see what exactly is going on. I think for a very reactive flighty horse, this is a pretty important part that people tend to ignore. I probably could definitely manhandle Scarlet's halter on, but I really prefer them to be ready mentally. After less than a minute from her original scare, she decided fairly quickly that it would be okay if I put her halter on today.
Oh, girl.
Another thing that I'm having to do some retraining or reminding Scarlet of is that she needs to walk calmly when we go in and out of her round
There
pen.
you go. Good girl. That's a nice
Some
mare.
people might ignore this step, but over time it
There
can
you
make your
go.
horse really scooty in and out of gates, and there is a possibility that they could get their hip caught or get stuck on a latch. So it is pretty important that even though this does seem like really boring training stuff, just the repetitive nature of doing it over and over until they're confident really pays off in the end. I am going to clean Ziggy's stall in the barn and the round pen, so I'm going to dispose of these extra little pieces of hay. I don't like wasting any snacks, and Scarlet could use a little something to munch on while she's turned out in the small arena. This low sugar grass hay is pretty thick stemmed, and I actually got one caught underneath my fingernail today, which really hurts. Frisco and Nigel look like they are already ready for their mash meals.
Frisco Bill.
But before everybody gets dinner, I do have a few chores to get done, and I am going to work Ziggy first. While I was away on my trip, I was able to reflect on how the summer went. Unfortunately, I didn't get to ride as much as I had liked. I did spend quite a bit of time searching through properties and going to look at different areas. I don't think it was a complete waste of time because we do have a better idea of what we are actually looking for right now. Our property hunt has been kind of an evolving process over the last couple of years. Yes, we have been looking for years now. Here are the pellets that I've been using for bedding for Ziggy and Frisco. It's just teeny tiny pieces of wood shavings. This barn is super nice with the attached runs on all of the stalls, but when it does get really windy, it creates kind of a tornado inside the barn, and these tiny pieces of shavings are definitely what got caught in Ziggy's eye before I left for my trip. His stall is particularly windy when the weather is not nice, so I am going to put some shavings on top of the pelleted bedding this time, and hopefully that will help with the dust. As we continue to plan for the perfect property, one thing that I am more aware of now after doing so much traveling is how hard it would be on the older horses. After looking at some properties in Colorado and Utah, we really decided that we just like Montana more. That is really easy to say when the weather is pretty nice out. I'm sure my mind is going to change when the snow starts coming and it gets bitterly cold. I have decided that if we do stay in Montana year-round, that I really do need a tiny indoor or something so I can work the horses when the weather is not great. Even when it's not super cold out, the spring is really rainy, and the fall, the wind can be crazy, so a tiny little indoor on our place would be perfect.
Zig! Zig!
Even though Ziggy does not have any metabolic issues, that doesn't mean that he's going anywhere anytime soon. I think a lot of people watching this channel may see other people rescuing horses, and they do find new homes rather quickly. I do like my horses to be in tip-top shape when they leave, so I know everything about them. Ziggy still has a few more months of conditioning and riding that need to be done before I feel comfortable sending him to a new home.
Honey, I hear you. Oh, hey, girl. Still sleeping. Are you grouchy? Honey. Hey.
It did seem like Tiny was over the fact that I left for a few days, but today she is a little bit on the grouchy side. It looks like I maybe filled up this little turd train a bit too full tonight. As far as Ziggy's health goes, I am still trying to get a urine sample to send off to the vet to make sure everything is okay in that area, because he still does pee a ton. Scarlet has been spending most of her time in the round pen since the weather is so nice this time of year. I'll probably just get Scarlet in a stall and a run next to Ziggy for the winter, but I might decide to put Prim over in Ziggy's stall and switch it up a little bit. With our property search getting pretty exhausting by this point, we've decided to put a little bit of a pause on it for now. A lot of things have changed since I've started my YouTube channel. I don't have a regular job anymore. I'm able to spend a lot more time with the horses, even though it doesn't seem like it because I'm not riding very much. The filming and editing do take up a pretty good chunk of my time nowadays, so unfortunately I'm not able to ride or train as much as I would like. I have been thinking a lot lately about the next horse that's going to join my little herd. Typically this time of year I like to get a horse like Scarlet that requires a lot of downtime so they can just hang out during the winter. I've thought really hard about getting another Mustang, but I just don't have time for a horse like that at this point.
Time for work, Ziggo.
Realistically, Ziggy is going to stay here for the whole winter. It's just a lot easier to find a horse a home in the springtime. Even though he is getting a lot stronger, I think he has quite a ways to go before he's conditioned properly. While I love a dramatic makeover, this part of the whole rehab process is pretty long and boring. Ziggy didn't look too bad when I got him, and although people still think he looks like the exact same horse, he has gained about 100 pounds already. The muscle that he's gained does not really show up that great on camera, When you look at his hips or his shoulders, you can definitely tell that he is spilling out a lot. His neck is much stronger than it was when I first got him. If you go back and look at some of his first videos, you could actually see the bones in his shoulders, which are nice and round and covered with muscle now. One thing that I've noticed recently as well is that he is standing much more balanced at rest, which is a really good sign. I really haven't had any trouble with his feet since I got him. They are pretty strong, and as long as they're kept on a regular trimming schedule, he shouldn't have any problems with them. I have noticed since the footing in my arena and even the round pen is not that great, he does do a little bit better with shoes on. I have been using the glue-on shoes with him, and I'm thinking that I might get him fitted for a pair of those fancy scoot boots that the half Arabian and Arabian that were at the hunter pace were wearing. When you break it down cost-wise, the boots are a pretty large initial investment, but it costs me about $70 every time I put a new pair of glue-on shoes on these horses. While I do reuse them, they get reset multiple times. It's just something to think about when I'm trying to justify the cost of buying him a pair of boots instead of using shoes all the time. Ziggy has also gotten a little bit better about being fly sprayed. He is not nearly as wiggly now, but I can tell that he still does not particularly care for it. He also is not particularly fond of me doting on him extra. But with him being older and it coming into winter, I do want to make sure he's not getting any fungus or rubs from me working him more consistently now. He does seem to be happy every time he gets to go to work. With him being older, I have noticed that he does have quite a bit of muscle soreness when we get started every day. He has one dose left on his second round of Adequan, and I do think it is really helping him stay nice and loose in his joints. I like to figure all of these things out before I start looking for a new home for these rehab horses, just so the new owner can be properly informed in the amount of maintenance and care that the horse will require. As you can see, as he jogs away, he's a little bit on the sore side, but as we go along through our warm-up, he definitely starts to stretch out. Once Ziggy is warmed up, he definitely starts moving more freely and extends out at the trot and is a lot more comfortable loping around than he has been in the past. This direction is the one he is more comfortable with. His body is just more balanced this way. I really try hard to let him warm up this direction first just so he gets loosened up, and then when we go the other direction, it is still a little bit harder for him.
Zig. There you go, good boy.
From this view, you can see exactly how square Ziggy is standing. You can barely see his hind legs when you stand directly in front of him, which is a really good sign. As we turn to go back the other direction, you can tell right away that he is quite a bit more stiff this direction. He always tries to turn back to his good way when we start off. He has been seen by my regular vet, and then he's seen a vet that did a chiropractic adjustment on him and kind of evaluated his body. Pretty typical for most horses to have a dominant side, and as they're used as a trail horse, this can get worse and worse just because they're walking along the trail. You're not really doing any arena work with them. So for Ziggy, this is going to take a little bit of time to get worked out. It is really apparent in the slow-mo that Ziggy is pretty balanced while he's trotting along. There is some lift to his back now, and he's sucking in his big belly a little bit more than he had been in the past. He is very balanced this way at the trot and also loping around. While he does look a little bit different than I would expect one of my quarter horses to go along, he does look pretty good for an Arabian at this point. He is always going to have a little bit higher of a head carriage, just the way his neck connects to his shoulder area. He is still a little bit hollow in his back, but it is greatly improved since when I first got him. I think bringing him in the arena and getting him off the line has really helped free up his movement a lot more. I'm pretty sure he wasn't lunged very much in the past, so it's allowed him to kind of have less things to think about, and he can focus on moving out and really improving his gaits. Arabians do have really good endurance, but Ziggy is quite out of shape right now. Even when he was in full work at the guest ranch, there's a good possibility that all he ever did was walk, maybe some trotting. I like to check Ziggy's back as we go along through our sessions, just so I can tell when he might be getting a little bit too tight. At this point, I feel like he's finally getting a little bit stronger, and he's able to work for a longer period of time before he gets fatigued. He usually does pretty well going to the right, and as I turn back to work him on the other side, he gets a little bit more sassy. I can tell it's harder for him to stay in frame or on the right lead, so he's always a little bit more spry this way. You can see as he goes around, he still has his nose tipped a little bit to the outside, even when he's loping around. A balanced horse would curve a little bit towards me with his head and also his rear end. And while it's pretty obvious that he is still stiff this direction, he is doing a much better job of keeping his body balanced, and he still falls out of lead sometimes, but not quite as often as he was doing the last couple of weeks. I'm not really chasing him around, I'm just encouraging him to move forward. Hopefully, as we go on through our session today, he'll feel more comfortable and move out to the edge of the round pen. Most of the time, I work him until he's just a little bit more relaxed and carrying his body more balanced, and then I'll stop and we'll do a few exercises to help strengthen his core. This is a really good one for anyone to do with a horse that's pretty quiet. I started off doing this with Ziggy when I had a halter on him, just to make sure he didn't freak out, because some horses can get a little bit wiggly about this. I'm just using my fingertips to put a little bit of pressure on his belly, and you can see that he kind of sucks it in and lifts up his back. When I first started doing this, Ziggy really did not like it, but now it's kind of like a release for him. You can see him shake his head and relax and blow out a bunch of air after he's held it for a few seconds. While it doesn't look like much, this can really help a horse, especially one that's as out of shape as Ziggy. I've probably only worked him for around 30 minutes so far, and he's already starting to sweat. He does have his winter coat coming in already. I have noticed over the last week or so that the horses have been growing in coarser hair for the winter. Around the end of the month, it should be getting below freezing at night, so they are right on track to be prepared for the cold snap coming up. With Ziggy already warmed up now, I'm going to try a new saddle on him. I did buy this for him quite a while ago, but his back had hardly any muscling on it, and it just did not fit him right. I am going to give him another quick brush to get off any loose dirt that came to the surface while he was being worked. The little barrel saddle that I had been using on him did fit him extremely well, but one thing that a lot of people don't tend to fit into the equation when they're saddle fitting is how the horse's body moves when they're in motion. So because Ziggy is very stiff to one side and bent kind of to the right a lot of times, a barrel saddle with a little bit longer of a tree is going to make him sore until he figures how to balance out his body. This is a little endurance saddle that I bought, and it fits him so much better now than it did before. The little pockets behind his shoulder blades are now filled in with muscle, so the tree fits him perfectly. Ideally, you want the tree to sit behind the shoulder blades so the horse can move without it poking it as they go along. This saddle is super cool. It's an older endurance saddle. It does have an aluminum tree. It is extremely lightweight, and it doesn't have any maker's marks or anything on it, but it is definitely a Stonewall saddle. Something really cool about this one is it does have a 3-point rigging, so I can adjust it to make the girth lay more forward on the saddle so that this is actually in the right spot on Ziggy's back. If I were to cinch him up right now, the saddle would get pulled forward. So I don't want this going up on his shoulder blades, so I am going to adjust it a little bit before we get back to work. I happen to have a little endurance cut wool pad for him. I don't really like the way this fits. It's still pretty long on his back. Ziggy is quite a short-backed horse. This pad is also pretty thick. I wish it were cut out around the girth area, but I think I can probably invest in one that fits him perfect once I see how this saddle is fitting him. To get the girth hanging right, I am actually gonna extend the rear part of this 3-point rigging, and hopefully that'll bring the adjustment forward a little bit. There are a ton of different ways to have a saddle rigged up, and it can impact the fit of the saddle pretty significantly, so that's something to keep in mind as you're shopping for a saddle for a horse. For Ziggy's cinch, I have this Weaver mohair one that I'm going to be using on him. It is a little bit too long for him. It's not sitting in quite the right place. After a little bit of adjusting, I can get it to where it's acceptable for what we're doing today. I'm not going to ride Ziggy today. I want to make sure this saddle fits him properly, and there might be a few things that come up as we go along, so I'm just going to observe him as he goes around and make sure this saddle is fitting as it should. It seems like there's enough clearance in his shoulders, and the tree is the perfect size for him, so hopefully this will be his new saddle. It is really nice to see him moving out so well in this new saddle. In slow-mo, you can definitely see how his shoulder blades are moving really freely, and they're not being poked by the saddle tree on this little guy. It looks like I also got the 3-point rigging adjusted perfectly on the first try, which usually never happens. You can see behind his elbow there's a lot of space, and the girth is not pinching anywhere back there. I can always tell when Ziggy is feeling good because he'll let out a little head shake or a little buck. He's definitely moving out a lot more freely than he was when we first started. I don't think he has any joint pain. I think right now it's just all muscle soreness from him learning how to carry his body correctly. It looks like he does have the right amount of clearance for his shoulders with this saddle. The only thing I really don't love about this saddle is that it is a tiny bit too small for me.
What do you think, Zig?
Since I got Ziggy, he has gained about 100 pounds, but Unfortunately, I have gained probably 15 pounds since I got him, which is not ideal, but as I start to cut back on all of the extra pizza I've been eating, I'm sure I'll be able to squeeze into this saddle relatively soon. When I ride Ziggy, it's only for about 15 to 20 minutes in the arena. Even though my body is well prepared for winter, I am still within a reasonable amount of weight for Ziggy to carry. It looks like Tiny is finally ready to snuggle up to me for the day. I think she's probably just wanting me to turn on her shaky plate already. As I pull Ziggy's saddle off, it looks like he does have one really prominent sweat spot. He used to get a spot on the same area with the other saddle right on his shoulder blade here. He has no other sweaty areas on him except in between his legs, and I think this spot actually may have nerve damage, which causes some weird sweat patterns to occur. I've noticed that that spot does get sweaty even when he's not wearing any saddle or anything. So it is probably due to an ill-fitting saddle somewhere in his past. If he was wearing a saddle in the past that was always pinching him on that right shoulder, that could very well be the reason that he travels so crooked now. Hopefully, now that all of his tack fits him very well, he'll realize that he doesn't have to guard that side of his body and he'll be able to straighten out a little bit more easily. I'm almost positive that the reason he may have nerve damage to the back of his shoulder blade area is because he was ridden in a saddle that was too wide for him.
No food yet, buddy.
Instead of fitting the tree to just behind the withers, a lot of people try and fit it right on top of the shoulders, which is a very common mistake, and people often think they need a much wider tree than they do when actually the placement of their saddle is completely off. Ziggy doesn't seem sore on that shoulder blade, so I think it is just some nerve damage that's causing that sweat spot in that area. It's really not a huge deal, but it is something that I'm going to take into consideration as I move through his reconditioning.
He wants to go on. Okay, hold on.
As suspected, Tiny just came out of her hay stall so I could turn on the shaky plate for her. It was really nice to set aside some time this evening to work Ziggy and figure a few things out. Hopefully, now that he has been gaining quite a bit of muscle, it'll just improve over the next couple of weeks. With winter slowly approaching, hopefully I'll get a few more days of riding out on the trail with him. The only thing I have left to do before I feed for the evening is clean out Frisco Bill's stall. It looks like these two old boys have had about enough of waiting for their dinner, so I better deliver their meals before they get too upset with me.
Frisco Bill.
Thank you guys so much for watching, and stay tuned for the next video.